Okay, moving on in this series of videos on cancel culture. This is the third of them. For anyone who doesn't know, there are two preceding. One is about, it's called Are Statues Necessary? And the one before that was on superheroes and the attempt of the radicalized left to deconstruct them, as well as deconstruct all of our iconotypes. There was a letter written on July 8th that was published in Harper's Weekly. Three paragraphs long. You can read it, pull it up online and read it. That was signed by a bunch of different kinds of artists, fiction writers, musicians, and so forth. People like J.K. Rowling and Margaret Atwood, and novelists like Louis Begley, John Banville, Wynton Marsalis, people like this, signing a letter saying, "No to cancel culture. You have no right to infringe upon our freedom of speech, especially when it is the task of the artist." It doesn't say this quite this way in the essay, but it should. It at least implies it, that it's the task of the artist to be confrontational, to be challenging. Art should upset you, I think. And if it doesn't upset you, it's not working and you have no business being an artist. Go elsewhere. We don't need you. The people who first stood in front of, let's say, Caravaggio's paintings in Rome were very shocked by his violent, graphic depictions of the iconotypes of the biblical world being shown with R-rated levels of violence. That was very shocking. And in a way, Caravaggio and his Artemisia Gentileschi, who was the next generation after him, who learned his style from her father, who was a pupil in his studio, continues the same shocking iconotypes. That represents a sort of threshold in art right there. That idea that, hey, who says we can't do this? Let's blow this thing right open. Art should be very challenging. And then, or the people who stood in front of Manet's Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe with this naked woman on a grass while two men fully clothed are chatting. Looks like it's in the middle of Central Park. You can't do that. Well, who says you can't do that? We're doing it. Never mind. Go away, bourgeois. Go back to your little money-making schemes. We know what we're doing. You guys don't. Or Baudelaire's poetry cycle, Le Fleur du Mal, which was entirely controversial when that came out. It's filled with all kinds of, back then, controversial things like lesbians making out and having sex. Ooh, so hot and controversial. Or somebody like Courbet's L'Origine du Monde, who was the first to paint a close-up of a woman's vagina, legs spread apart. You can't even see her face. That was very controversial. These are the kind of things that move art along. Or the people who stood in front of Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon for the first time, and I stood in front of that painting. It's astonishing and raw and extremely confrontational. Or let's say the novels of Ulysses was very shocking when it came out, James Joyce's Ulysses, because it contained some pornographic sex, but it was very frank, because the whole point of the book was to create an encyclopedia of the human body. So of course guys are in there jerking off to some girl across the street. The last chapter is a woman thinking about the guy she just fucked last night and how great it was. That got tried for obscenity and was found to, this is art. Joyce is not a pornographer. This is what art is, does, and should be. Besides, this is modernism now. We can do anything we want. Or think of Lolita. Cancel culture would cancel Lolita for sure. That's a dead certain guarantee. An older man in love with a 15-year-old girl who does indeed eventually have sex with her, that would be part of cancel culture. Really? You want to get rid of one of the best novels ever written by a man with an encyclopedically erudite mind? That book is very difficult to read. It's almost like Ulysses. It's not just a simple story the way the silly Adrian Lyne film version of it is, which eliminates all the black humor and Nabokov's wonderful sense of humor and his sarcasm and irony and wit. That's just a stripping of it down to Adrian Lyne's film version of Lolita just strips it down to a prurient narrative, which is not what's going on in that book. We don't need cancel culture canceling our classics. We don't need them to cancel Huckleberry Finn because it contains the N-word. Go away. We don't need you. Go cancel yourselves. These people would cancel Naked Lunch, presumably. William Burroughs, or almost any book by William Burroughs that is full of all kinds of pornographic sex, coprophagia, all kinds of disgusting things. But that's precisely the point of what he's doing. He's representing this vision of shit, basically. It's a world that's just turning to shit. And not that that's all he's doing. Of course, Burroughs was a master. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. But I want to introduce then this concept of dangerous visions. This is, I'm borrowing this from the title of Harlan Ellison's great 1967 science fiction anthology that turned the world of science fiction upside down. The staid, well-behaved guys like Asimov and Heinlein. You would never find a sex scene in their stuff. Arthur C. Clarke, that generation in the 1950s. Ellison comes along. He's the sort of punk rock star of science fiction. He died recently. If you don't know him, look him up. He's one of the best short story writers of all time, period. And this collection introduced people like brand new writers like J.G. Ballard is in there, Philip K. Dick is in there, Larry Niven is in there, Carol Emshwiller is in there, all kinds of hip new writers who take science fiction down to the streets and say, forget about spaceships and rockets. We're doing this down at street level where real people do real things. And that is one of the most famous, that was groundbreaking. It was a huge, big deal. It turns science fiction upside down. 1967, it opened all the doors. And so I want to bring this, borrow from him this word, dangerous visions, as an antidote to cancel culture. And in this video, I'm hereby canceling cancel culture. You can consider my name signed on that letter as well. The dangerous visions that I've just been talking about here with the art of Caravaggio and William Burroughs and Lolita. Now, with regard to art shouldn't be comforting. It's not something you go out to do and it looks exactly like what you're doing at home. It's, we're all comforted. And I don't know when the left woke up and got out of bed with this moral superiority. The radicalized left is now the new right. I mean, think about a movie like The Birdcage, for instance, an 80s film with Robin Williams. It's based on a French movie, Le Cage aux Folles. Robin Williams plays a gay man. Gene Hackman is a very morally superior, uptight right-winger, conservative guy. And so he comes over to visit, and they have to hide all the artwork. They have to hide everything from him because he'll cancel everything. He's so morally superior, so certain of his worldview, that he'll anathematize everything. So they have to hide all this bourgeois underground kind of stuff away from him. When did the left become the right now? I'm a little confused here. I thought the left was all about tolerance and new ideas. And those days are dead, done, and gone. I mean, if radical feminism had its way, and this is another group of cancel idiots, if radical feminism had its way, they would cancel Venus in Furs, the novel written by Leopold von Sacher-Masoch at the end of the 19th century, and I've read it, it's a very good novel, that introduces the idea of masochism, because S&M is all about males exerting power over females and dominating them, shoving them down. Really? Because it looks to me like S&M is a power game between both sexes on an equal plane, playing different roles about, now you be the dom, I'll be the sub, let's trade roles. That doesn't work. This is all this narrowing, all this constricting and narrowing of visions down to a very black and white view of things. Art's not black and white. Art is about grays, ambiguities, complexities. The more challenging, the more upsetting it is, the better it's doing its job. If you stand in front of a Francis Bacon painting, as I have done in the Art Institute in Chicago, they have a collection of them there. They're gigantic, and they're really upsetting. I mean, just looking at those paintings, they're monstrous and full of raw, visceral power that really make you kind of nervous standing in front of me. You're not quite sure what you're seeing here. What is he saying? What are these creatures from the abyss that is he showing us here? That's what art needs to do. That's how it works. That's how it happens. Now, when I was a kid growing up, I remember that cinema was full of dangerous visions. As it started in 1968, up to that, it's pretty. That's why I don't watch old movies. They're pretty empty of the codes that were imposed on them, ruined art, and I don't think film got going I don't care what the previous generation of movie critics say, earlier films are not as good as 70s, 80s, and early 90s movies. That's just a fact. Because once the chains were taken off and the ratings system was introduced in the late 60s, early 70s, we started getting films like Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider or Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, which was X-rated and most certainly could not be made today. It would be canceled for its audacity, showing a rape scene. These guys having fun, raping this woman. Oh, you can't cancel that, cancel it. Really? You're destroying one of the greatest films ever made here. But the point I want to make here is that when I was growing up, cinema was a scary thing. Admittedly, I was a kid, but this remained true all up into my 20s. That you never knew in the 70s what taboo area of the human experience you were going to be exposed to with films like Taxi Driver, let's say, or Pretty Baby. If anyone remembers that, it was a film about a 13-year-old prostitute. I believe it was Jodie Foster playing her, if I remember right, who was also playing a prostitute in Taxi Driver. But I've forgotten for sure on that one. Looking for Mr. Goodbar, about the woman who's out carousing in bars, fucking one guy every night. One night she picks up the wrong guy, played by Tom Berenger, this is a forgotten movie, by the way, who takes her back to her apartment, has sex with her, and then stabs her to death. And that's how the movie ends. Again, dangerous visions here. Cinema was packed with dangerous visions all through the 70s. One challenging, unnerving, unsettling thing after the next. Even porn, as it came out with Deep Throat, was at first at least flirted with the mainstream. Oh, maybe we can do this too as well. But it was part of that whole cultural mentality that there should be no taboos in art, and I don't believe that there should be any whatsoever, not even one. Anything is permissible, everything is possible. Yeah, and then so cinema takes off. You get one great film after the next. We get the 70s with the big mega blockbusters that kind of displaced that sort of shocking avant-garde extension of the European culture of dangerous visions into American cinema. But it continued well down into the 90s, and perhaps the last truly dangerous film was David Cronenberg's Crash, which was filmed in 1996, I believe it was, based on a J.G. Ballard novel about people having sex in cars and crashing and trying to time the orgasm with the moment of the impact of the automobile. Oh, there's a dangerous idea there. I remember when I heard, I'd already been a fan of Cronenberg for quite a while, and speaking of dangerous visions, I mean, it's just his films are one dangerous vision after the next. Very challenging, upsetting, unnerving stuff. And I remember when he announced that he was going to make Crash, and I went to go. I'd never read Ballard, didn't know who he was, and I remember picking up his book, The Atrocity Exhibition, put out by Research Publications, almost in a kind of a magazine format with a spine, though, and flipping through it, and it was illustrated, and it was really wild. Those images in there were totally the mixture of sex and automobiles and pornographic sex. That was something else. I was like, well, this is... Art and culture are still going here. We're still pushing the boundaries. We're pushing it and moving things along. So this is what art does. It is not about making you feel good about yourself. It's not all about a Spielberg movie, let's say. Not that there's anything wrong with Spielberg. He's one of my favorites. But that's only one aspect of art, the euphoric aspect. Art should be unnerving. It should haunt the peripheries of your consciousness after you've seen a great painting by Francis Bacon, or after you've read Lolita. It makes you a little bit nervous, reading Lolita, feeling kind of perverted. Like, am I supposed to be reading this? Exactly the point. That's what Nabokov is doing. That's exactly the point. He's confronting you with very upsetting, very dangerous images. And you can look at the work of the hypermodern artist, Mary Church, whose artistic estate I've inherited and then I'm editing. One dangerous vision in that art after the next. There's a lot of pornographic images. There's a lot of all kinds of upsetting, unnerving images, stacks of dead babies, and that will be I'm putting that out later this year in full color off of Amazon, CreateSpace. It'll be a full, large catalog of her stuff for people to peruse and see what we lost here with the suicide of this very great hypermodern artist. So if you're a budding poet, painter, musician, artist, you should be in search of dangerous visions. You should not be giving a single thought to political correctness of any kind. Artists are out there beyond the pale. It's sort of like the rest of us have this little village that we've set up with a wall around it. And the artist is the one guy who says, how come nobody goes out beyond the wall? Just like in M. Night Shyamalan's movie The Village, where they have a wall that nobody's allowed to go out beyond that wall, because what's beyond that wall in that movie are these horrific monsters that the village is they want to keep you safe. But the artist is like the person in such a village who gets curious. Why doesn't anybody go out beyond the wall? Let's go see, take a look. And they become adventurous, so they go out beyond the wall and they find scary things, and they come back and tell you about it with their visions, dangerous visions, and their and the imaginations of poets, artists, musicians, writers, even thinkers. I also noticed on that letter, just as a curious aside, that there were no signatures of any philosophers or critical theoreticians on that letter, which I thought was kind of interesting, and maybe it's a reflection of the fact that American culture has a paucity of intellect right now. There aren't too many dangerous thinkers around anymore. Everyone's scared that they might upset someone else and say the wrong thing. Well, fuck everyone else. Say whatever you want. But the letter, though, does bring up, the issue that a lot of these people are, their livelihoods are threatened. No one's going to cancel me because there's nothing to cancel. No, I work for myself. I'm beholden to no institution. I'm outside of academe. I'm a nomad. You can't cancel John David Ebert. It won't work. But a lot of these people on this letter, have jobs they can be fired from, lose their livelihoods. So this is a serious thing here. This is not just some passing fad or controversy. This is a war. This is a cultural war that we have going on here. And so you have my signature to this letter.